Hi, my name is Joanna Krotz. I'm really glad to be here despite the deluge outside. Couldn't do anything about that. I want to say thanks to Bruce for inviting me here today. And let me tell you a story about what brings me here today. So about 7 years ago, in 2009, a young teenager, 14 years old, whose name is Ava Anderson, lives up in East Providence, Rhode Island, up the coast a ways, was watching a TV show. And she heard about a study on the show that said that teenagers had toxic chemicals in their bloodstream. And it really disturbed her, as you can imagine. And these toxic chemicals came from personal care products like shampoo and hand sanitizer and skincare cream and cosmetics, right? So she started researching to find out about these ingredients and what would happen to them. And then she also decided she better switch to all natural products and organics, even though it was a lot more expensive. So she bought all these other organic natural products, still researching, looked at the ingredients on these products and found out that the labels were more about marketing than about safeguarding health. Big disappointment. And then she's still researching, and it's 2009, right? So she starts blogging and sharing everything she knows and so on, and then goes around the house throwing out products everywhere. You know, her mother's, her grandmother's, all the cosmetics, all the hand lotions, all the hand sanitizers, all the house cleaning products. And then it dawns on her that she has nothing to put in the place of these products. They're all gone, nothing left. So she decides that she's going to have to create some. And with the help of a lot of family and friends, she's then 14, by the end of that year, December 2009, now she's age 15, she launches Ava Anderson Non-Toxic, a company, with 6 skincare creams. Fast forward, 7 years later, she's 22 years old. She's a graduate of college, and this Ava Anderson Non-Toxic company now has 80 products, hand creams, pet lotions and products, house cleaning, baby, men's grooming, women's cosmetics, and the line is growing. She has 80 already. It's a multi-million-dollar company. And also, she's gone down to Washington to testify before Congress because there was a bill before the government in 2013 that was going to give the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, more oversight over drug items. Didn't get to the floor. The industry lobbyists had something to say about that. But she's an activist, and she's really interested in changing the equation. And for your benefit, interestingly, the products that are sold in Europe have much more stringent regulations than the ones in America. So the products that are going out that she was objecting to are different formulas. The manufacturers make different formulas when they go into Europe. So what's the takeaway from Ava Anderson? First, girls do scale. Second, girls are innovative. Third, girls take risks. Fourth, girls launch and run companies differently than men do, and boys. And women's businesses too often are below the radar. I would bet you that if there were a 15-year-old boy, a teenager, up somewhere in Providence, creating a company that was that successful that quickly at that age, especially if it were technology, the media would have been all over it. As it is, she hasn't got that much press. I mean, she's had local kinds of profiles and stuff, but nobody's actually heard of her very much. So Susan Duffy, who directs the entrepreneurial program for women, specifically designed for women up at Babson College outside Boston, points out that the dominant narrative and optics of entrepreneurship is male. Yet entrepreneurship is a continuum of venture creation, and it's done a lot of different ways. And most companies do not reach the level of reeling in $1 million in revenue each year, as I'm sure you're learning. So Duffy up at Babson puts it at 6.3% male-owned companies, that's all, and 1.8% women-owned companies that get to that threshold of $1 million or more. And I know you've been looking into the characteristics and definitions of entrepreneurship. And of course, that's what I've done for years as an editor at Time Inc., at a magazine called Fortune Small Business, and also writing for about a decade as a small business columnist and advisor for startups and established businesses. And I've interviewed dozens and dozens of men and women-owned companies, men and women founders, and done a ton of research, both as a columnist and then when I decided to write this book. And I can tell you categorically that women are different when they run businesses. They run it differently than men do. And all this research and all these interviews are in the book as well. So what I want to dive into this afternoon, among the myths that you're learning, I know you're learning about MVP and what you do about minimum viable product and how you get your painkiller to actually be the product that customers want and will buy, and you're looking at risk taking and not to be too risky, but just risky enough, and about failure, and all these myths that you have about entrepreneurship. One of the biggest and most enduring ones that I see is that somehow you have to have this male model. You have to be this relentless, pioneering warrior, you know, the Steve Jobs, the Zuckerberg, the Kevin Systrom at Instagram. And I think that there's a much larger, broader platform that women do it differently. So slowly, too slowly, for my money, the realization is growing that women add unique and tangible value to an entrepreneurship and to companies. And let me tell you some for instances. In 2010, a Silicon Valley study was done by a woman who's a VC named Cindy Padnos, who's pretty well known out there. She founded a company called Illuminate. And she found in her study that performance improves in startups that have women on board. Women-led, venture-backed, high-tech companies average 12% higher annual revenues than male counterparts. So that's not a girl biz, you know, that's not coaching or catering, that's a tech company. And also, a 2012 study from Dow Jones Private Equity and Venture Capital reviewed more than 15 years of venture-backed data and executive info, and found that startups with 5 or more females on them were 61% successful and only 39% failure. That's 6 out of 10, more than 6 out of 10. And again, you know from your studies that this is extraordinary, that that percentage of startups would be successful. The need for diversity and senior women on a business team has pivoted. It's not just a moral obligation anymore. It's not politically correct attitudes. It's actually a leading edge economic advantage, as these studies show. So a diverse team offers benefits of a richness on the platform. Assets like experience, ideas, what you bring to the party in terms of what your life has been like, what your financial assets are, what friends and fans you can bring into the startup. All of it counts. And then when women are CEOs, they just hire more women. It's just a fact. So achieving better performance with senior women holds true across the business continuum, not just for startups or young companies. Researcher Catalyst reported a 26% higher return for all global companies that had women on the board, women directors. And similarly, after looking at directors as well, the prestigious consultant McKinsey & Company, I'm sure you've heard of, in a widely cited 2015 report, found that operating profits were 56% higher with companies that had women on the board as compared to companies that had no women on the board, 56%. So Illuminate's VC, Padnos Cindy, says it's not clear why, when you put women in positions of leadership and power, why they have businesses that use less capital and generate more revenue, much more often than men do. One of her theories, pretty obvious, is women don't get funding nearly as much or as often as men do. So they just have to make do with less. You know, lemon, lemonade, what can you do? On the other hand, the women's companies that have grown and could secure funding, could get backing, still use less capital and generate more revenue. So it's not even just a matter of scarcity. And Padnos tells this story that kind of encapsulates why it is women change the equation and what happens. So her company, her VC company, Illuminate, was backing a software development product. And the developers were really excited about this. It was for a smartphone, mobile software app. And they got to a point where they really wanted to demo it, and they brought it into the conference room, and they had their marketing team take a look at it, and everyone's really excited. And the marketing people are getting thrilled, developers are getting thrilled, and then all of a sudden into this hubbub, the lone woman, the only woman on the marketing team, had said, guys, what are you, crazy? What are you doing? And they're all looking at her like, what is the problem? It turns out this mobile app targeting women as customers was designed to vibrate. And she had to point out that women don't wear their mobile on their hip the way men do. They have it in their purse, mostly professional women, and in their pocketbook, in their briefcases. So that's one of the issues that happens. More recent studies have come up with similar results. Just this month, February, a study from the Peterson Institute for International Economics and Ernst & Young showed significant correlation between positions of leadership of women and company profitability. This is study after study now. Companies with at least 30% female leadership, that is just under a third, had net profit margins of 6 percentage points higher than those that had no women in the top ranks. And that same 2050 McKinsey report I mentioned found that companies that rank in the top quartile, top 25% for gender diversity, are 15% more profitable no matter what their industry. So they're 15% above the mean average of whatever industry they're in across the board. Again, Cindy Padno says there's no question that there's gender bias out there and it's affecting all of us. The overwhelming number of venture investors are male. In this country, 95% of VC investors with decision-making authority are male, and the bulk of those are white. So it's really white men that are making these decisions. Research from Harvard and elsewhere that I've seen, you may as well, show that when there are two identical business plans and absolutely the same management pedigree, and all that's different is the first name is female on the founder and the other first name is male on the founder, male investors and sadly women investors will give more money to the male, even though those businesses are exactly the same. So there's something going on that we ought to take a look at. I believe not only that it's time to change, but that change is occurring way too incrementally. The pace is really glacial for women startups, and I'd like to accelerate that process. So that's what brought me here today, to talk to you all who are going to grow up and make change happen. And also, that's what was the motivation for the book that I've just published, which is now buried below my papers, which is called Being Equal Doesn't Mean Being the Same. And I've also put a provocative and controversial subtitle on there, which is Why Behaving Like a Girl Can Change Your Life and Grow Your Business. Because we've seen studies now that say when you do that, profit will spike. As an MSN small business columnist for years, I've interviewed a lot of these startups, as I've mentioned. And there's a broad range of cultural, biologic, and research that is supporting all the things that I've been talking about. The only exception, I don't see too many academic institutions, Bruce is the exception, and I don't see too many corporate facilities really teaching about what women bring into a startup. And the only exception that I see nowadays is about women angel investors. As you know, early seed, hands-on kind of investing. And those affluent individuals or small networks are backing women-led ventures. So that little bit is bubbling up, and it's changing things. For instance, in 2012, there were only 13% of the nearly 317,000 angel investors in the US who were women. 2012. 2014, so that's a little more than 1 out of 10. 2014, it's doubled, 26%. And 2015 numbers haven't come out yet for angel investors who are female, but my guess is that's also spiked. So I think if every founder and would-be founder understands the different ways the sexes behave in business, it will help you succeed. And besides defining those gender differences, I'm going to talk about a few women owners and the decisions they make and how I see them making women-tilted kinds of choices. And then I'll offer some takeaway tips that I hope that you will think about for some time. So to show you how these sex-based characteristics work out, I've devised a SWOT analysis. I'm sure you've come across this in looking at companies' strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or limitations. And instead of looking at a company, the external and internal challenges based on that, I'm going to apply a SWOT analysis to women's entrepreneurship and the characteristics that women show. But I'm going to change the order. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and then strengths, weaknesses, threats, and then opportunities, because I'd like to end on an optimistic note rather than the threats. So surprisingly, on the strengths, some of women's key strengths come from biologic, hardwired, genetic differences between the sexes. For instance, the brains of men, the brains of women are actually really different. Men's brains are 10% larger than women's brains, and you might think this has to do with smarts, but sadly it's just because men have bigger bodies, and so they need a bigger brain to handle the musculature and the biologic systems. Women's brains have a lot of nerve cells, many more than men, in the corpus callosum, that stem that connects the right brain and the left brain. So data transfer for women, nerve cells going back and forth in the hemispheres is really fast. Women think faster than men, typically. And here's the Miranda warning. No one's 100% male or 100% female. We're all on a continuum, but most of the time, these have been shown from studies. And what that does is, so the right, to remind you, the right side is the visual, intuitive side. The left is the analytic, verbal, abstract side. Men are much stronger, typically, on the left side. And all that puts some science behind a lot of cliches we've probably all of us heard all our lives. So for instance, men really don't have to ask for directions. They, because they have that left brain dominance, they can put themselves in the landscape and have a notion of where they are. And they might not know they have to take a left turn or a right turn, but they know they basically have to go in that direction because they have that overview from the left brain. Women who have always said, oh, they're so intuitive, they communicate better. Actually, that data transfer, in my opinion, women pick up on nonverbal body language, on facial expression from the right brain, transfers over to the left, and they know what's going on, and they can see whether or not the message is being picked up. So that's a girl trait. Other research comes from a neuroeconomist named Paul Zak, who works out at the University of Claremont Graduate School in California. And Zak investigates the hormonal basis of decision making. So he looks at testosterone, oxytocin, and estrogen, and he figures out how that might change decision making by giving, the studies are, he gives people tasks and he sees what happens when they do that. His findings, women tend to connect better to people and to multitask better. Men tend to be better at single-minded focus and top-down motivation. So no surprise women are innate multitaskers. I don't know if you have experienced this in your life, but I have. A guy's doing something and something's going on and you want him to do something else. You say, how about that other thing? So, wait, I'm doing something. Leave me alone. Gets a little irritated. Women, when they're working on something, someone says, do something else. They say, okay, I'll get to it in a minute. Give me a second. It's a different kind of attitude. Zak also found that, you're all looking at each other. Zak also found that when he infused people, women as well as men, with high doses of testosterone, women as well as men, everyone became noticeably less generous. They wouldn't share resources. They wouldn't play well in the sandbox. I'm just saying. As well, in other research, a neuroscientist named John Coates, who used to be a trader on the street in London and watched behavior go on the stock exchange in London, decided he had to do some research about this, so he got his degree. And he's working on the influence of hormones and the physiological changes that go on in the body when you risk and when you earn or lose money. He discovered that high levels of testosterone generate a much greater degree of risk-taking. So it's a kind of fight or flight that I'm sure you've heard about. It goes from testosterone to adrenaline to cortisone, and it's like skydiving. So you're making bets on money, and it feels like the body is in some kind of danger or taking a thrill. And this guy, John Coates, who's written a book as well, hypothesizes that if there had been more women on the floors of the stock exchanges in 2008, or older men whose testosterone wouldn't have been as high. And we know there's all masters of the universe who are traders and young dudes, right? If that complexion had been different, he thinks there would not have been such a bad meltdown in the financial markets because there would have been some check and balance. So those are the nature, hardwired differences. On the nurture side, typically, as most of us have seen pretty much all our lives, girls, the women they become, are socialized more often than boys to pay attention, to communicate, to listen. Women take time to engage. They listen more readily. They're more open-minded. They share power. They're collegial. They tend to build teams. By contrast, men typically manage by rewarding results, so command and control. You do the data, you do the performance, you do what I ask, and then I'll give you something, whether it be a promotion or money or some kind of approval. Women's social skills, that team building that they tend to do, also translates into significant online strengths. So local, mobile, and social kinds of technologies have accelerated in terms of women's engagement. How does that translate into benefits for women owners? First, women tend to ask questions rather than simply to get to work, and that adds to the discussion. They'll push the boundary. They'll ask, is there another way to do this? And they have the asking of those questions might actually get a solution or an alternative that nobody had thought of before because there's more discussion going on. Women's listening skills tend to build relationships and add to sales and networking. Again, bringing in added value, customer generation, revenue generation. Sharing power encourages teamwork, brainstorming and contributions among staff, which is going to leverage talent. And what could be better in a startup where resources are scant and everyone has to do double duty. And then fourth, women often start businesses out of personal experience, which brings passion and detailed market knowledge to whatever it is they're doing. So let me give you an example. In 2007, a woman I know out in California, whose name is Romy Taramina, had hideous morning sickness when she was pregnant. And she was looking around for some kind of solution, and she found these acupressure wristbands that relieved the nausea. Problem was they were really, really ugly. They just were horrible. So she decided to start a business called Psybands, PSI, and made these day-glow, berry-colored, different kinds of fashion-forward wristbands. And the business took off. She's won dozens of small business awards. The bands, by the way, also work for chemotherapy, nausea, and for travel sickness, so not just pregnancy. And she's now in Whole Foods, CVS, and Toys R Us, all over the country, from one problem that she had that she needed a solution to. So in addition to the gender-specific strengths, women also bring business vulnerabilities into the arena. The most significant one in the US and actually around the world is that women's businesses tend to be solopreneur. One woman, one founder, and that's it. More than 80% of women-owned businesses in this country, according to the US Census Bureau, are called non-employee firms because there's just the one. Women simply do not scale businesses as often or as well as men do. Be interested to hear what you think about at the end, why that is. Next, some of the characteristics that fuel women's strengths also have a downside. So, like Romy, so engaged in the day-to-day, passionate about the detail, they lose the forest, and they're just looking at trees. And they don't necessarily think about exit strategy, whether IPO, whether partnership, whether merger, acquisition, whatever it is. They don't necessarily have a business plan that looks out to the future. They're working in the business instead of on it. And they tend to focus on those details. So let me tell you about another woman who illustrates to me the best and the worst of the strengths and the weaknesses. And her name is Lori Cheek, C-H-E-E-K. And she lost, I think, a half dozen years of squandered resources and money and time because she didn't pay attention to a few of the things I'm talking about, even though she had a fabulous idea and got a lot of attention for it. So in 2008, she was then an architect, contract architect, which means she does offices, not houses. And she was out with a colleague having dinner in a restaurant. And as they left the restaurant, the guy she's with, the colleague, took out a business card and scribbled, "Will you have dinner? Would you like to have dinner?" Because he was attracted to the woman at the table across the way. And he just went by and dropped it on her table. And this was for Lori like game-changing light bulb because he didn't intrude on the party she was with. He didn't get in her face. He didn't talk to her. He just had this gesture that was up to her, whether she wanted to get in touch or not. She just thought this was romantic and intriguing and smart. So then the business. She launched an online dating service, a business, web-based, 2008. And she created these black, sleek business cards, size of a business card. And it's a subscriber model, so that was the business side of it. You subscribed, got these cards. And they had these cheeky phrases on them like, "I'm way cooler than your date," or "I just put all my drinks on your tab," or Wall Street kinds of ones, because of course she's based in New York. And she got a ton of interest and press, because she's like a guru, crazy guru marketer, incredibly terrific. If you Google her name, Lori Cheek, you'll see incredible amount of press. She had a New York Times profile, all of that. The only problem was she took on a couple of partners who didn't really know too much about what they were doing. They were supposed to be doing the business side. She never did a business plan. She cheaped out on the technology for her website, hiring developers in the Ukraine and in Rio and in Asia. And every time people would come to the site, it would crash. And then she didn't have any strategy for the business. She wouldn't take on the financial dashboard. And she kept working on it, or in it, as I should say. And then she got this incredible break. She was invited to come on Shark Tank on season 5 in 2013. incredible rigaround they give you. I mean, she went through gatekeeping after gatekeeping and videos, and finally she was accepted as a contestant. And so there she is out in LA, and in her words she said, "I don't think it could have gone worse." She still didn't have a good handle on the finances. She still didn't really have the technology done right. And Mark Cuban told her she was delusional. And that was the polite one. Kevin O'Leary said, "You need to take your hobby behind a barn and shoot it like a rabid dog." Finally, she got the message. So nowadays she's gone mobile, and I think she probably should have figured that out a few years ago if she had paid attention to her customer and the culture. Online dating has moved there way, way before she did. And also, she took a course and she's learned something about finances. Hats off to you, you're doing that now. And the business is now starting to develop. So other weaknesses for women include a tendency to be overly risk averse. They bootstrap, they don't like to take on debt, even when they ought to, even when the business is in a position where they should be taking loans or some equity capital, they'd rather do it themselves. And the last widespread for weaknesses was something I called superwoman syndrome. It's especially characteristic of women who are in home-based businesses, and the workday and the weekday kind of get all blurred. Family, work life, all blurred. There's no real time to think about delegating or strategize, and they'd rather just take care of things as it comes up. But also, one of the key reasons women business owners don't delegate is the fear of losing control. A lot of women, in this country at least, come out of corporate life to start businesses, and they've had perhaps a rough time there. They couldn't get ahead, hit the wall, had thousands of ideas that someone else adopted and co-opted, and now that they're on their own doing it their way, they don't really want to delegate or change things. They want to be in charge for themselves. So getting over such fears, the money and that delegation and control, is critical, of course, to growing the business, and women need to do that. And that brings me to the threats or limitations that women entrepreneurs nowadays face. And I believe that most of these threats have to do with male perceptions of how women behave in business and what women's leadership is supposed to be like, because that's the male model. And they don't behave like men, so it looks like they're not leading. Women continue to be overlooked, undervalued, untapped, underutilized, all women owners, and especially by the money men. And we've seen that the overwhelming number of people who supply money to startups is male. Women entrepreneurs, by and large, are not in the room, and women investor decision makers are not in the room when the pitches get done, when the elevator speech is said, and when the conversations about who are you, what do you know, what do you want to do happen. They're just not in those rooms. And a serious dynamic of this challenge is that most women owners are hanging out with other women, which is cool, that's nice. The business associations, the clubs, the support groups. However, I think women owners need to go where the boys are. You know, they need to get into co-ed associations, because the men funders are not coming to the women's groups. So there need to be women who show that they can and are doing leadership, startups, and capital efficient companies, and then they will get a different attitude and a different opinion. Alongside these external challenges is women's really different idea of what success looks like. So for men who start businesses usually to make money, women who start businesses usually for a purpose, like the couples, a few of them I talked about, the idea of success is big hits, fueled by big money. The yardstick is metrics and dough. And for women, not so much. Purpose, satisfaction, work-life balance. Women want to have time for yoga. They want to go to Machu Picchu and have a spiritual adventure. They're not going to work necessarily 24/7 as often as men will on a startup. And that's been seen as a lack of commitment by the male funders because they're not behaving like the guys. I think this is changing a little, particularly in the millennial generation. People are beginning to say, well, wait a minute, there's more to life than this. And actually, if you bring those interests and that kind of robust change into a startup, you have a better opportunity to grow it. But there's still a lot of prejudice out there. So what's to be done? What opportunities are there from the growing number of women startups and the really distinctly different flavors that they bring into the party? Some of the juiciest prospects on the horizon, as far as I'm concerned, have to do with crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, which I'm sure you're looking into. Women are gravitating to social media in much bigger numbers than men are. And it's really terrific for all entrepreneurs, but it's especially terrific for women because it gets rid of all those male gatekeepers and all the middlemen, and they can go direct to someone who wants to invest in their business. If I put a campaign up on Kickstarter, I can get $1,000 from some woman in Hong Kong or in Mexico City who's interested in my idea. I don't have to go into a room and do my business plan and whatever. I don't even necessarily need an MVP yet. I just have to get people who care about my idea. Well, one industry consultant puts it this way: crowdfunding achieves a different level of engagement in social media, whereby the crowd not only says they like you, but they're willing to put money behind your idea to make it happen. And obviously, again, these are great tools for everyone, but women really will benefit the most. Another timely opportunity for women and all entrepreneurs is the fast-growing rise of what is called the citizen consumer. So cause marketing. You see all these multinationals who are backing various kinds of causes, whether national parks or combating AIDS in Africa or climate change or trying to find a cure for breast cancer. Startups and large companies are all doing this because they want to be seen as being about more than money, and they want to have a soul, and it sells product. So the brand looks thoughtful and has this really way of looking not so as if it's all about money, and people respond to that. Women are particularly influenced by cause marketing, or purpose marketing as it's sometimes called, and that's true for both business owners and customers. And the last opportunity I want to emphasize is that women who run their own businesses get to do it their own way. They may sound obvious, but again, if a lot of women come out of corporations and they've had to do it the male way or somebody else's way, now they're in charge and they can be the leader they want to be with the priorities, the values, the schedule that they decide. And it's a big deal. And that loss of control that they have in large companies is this fundamental reason why women are leaving the companies and starting businesses 2-to-1 in this country compared to men. And I'll give you a quick example of how that works, because women bring these tangible payoffs into the businesses they start. So in the late 1990s, another Lori Patterson, who was in Urbana, Illinois, which is a hub for engineering and university, got her dream job. And she was trained as an engineer, a little unusual for a woman in the early 90s, and there she was. She'd worked for Caterpillar. And she got this job as a change agent in CRM. Remember CRM, Customer Relationship Management Software. And she was based in Urbana, where the factory was. The home office was up in Chicago, 5-hour drive away. So she'd get in the car Monday morning, she'd take a 5-hour commute, she'd stay there till Friday, she'd come back to her home and her young family. And she said, the company just had no idea of how to handle or even offer any help for a young family. She had a toddler, and it just wasn't working. So anyway, one day she's leaving, she comes downstairs Monday morning, and she has shoes by the door, and they've disappeared. She has to get in the car and drive up to Chicago. And so she thinks, well, her 2-year-old son, the toddler, maybe he's hidden them, maybe it's a game, maybe he's a little resentful. But anyway, she doesn't have the time for this, right? She's got to drive up to Chicago. So she runs upstairs, she gets another pair of shoes, she drives. She comes back on Friday, picks up the kid at her mother-in-law's house, who's been babysitting, takes off her shoes. The mother-in-law gives her some slippers to put on. And the kid, the 2-year-old, looks at his mom with now what looked like shoes to him. She's about to leave, and he throws himself over her feet and starts wailing to beat the band, screaming, like, Mom, don't go. So it's clear to her family's falling apart, and she quits. And she starts her own company. And she calls it Pixo, P-I-X-O. It's an IT services company out of Urbana. And she's growing it and changing it in ways that she's learned are different than what she had. So she said that she learned in the large company, leaders assume that they know everything instead of taking responsibility for recognizing what they don't. Men are less likely to think they don't know everything. Women are less likely to think they do. As a result, Patterson began managing with a philosophy she calls the throne-less mentality. No royal privileges for anyone, not kings, not queens, not owners. And also, she steered the company differently. She had a bunch of sweat equity investors, partners. Little by little, she bought them out. The company grew very slowly. By 2013, like 13 years after she founded it or so, she decided to expand, which meant she was bringing in a whole lot of new employees at the same time. So she has about 30 staff, and about a third of them, 10 or so, were all new at the same time. And as a result, she felt she really needed to do something to bring them into the culture and the values of the company. So she instituted a weekly meeting for an hour. Each each staffer would come in and present an aha moment, whatever that meant to him or her, in whatever way he or she wanted to. And of course that bonded everyone. It gave them a lot of interest in each other and made a team and so on. And the other thing she did is every morning she holds a 5-minute meeting staff-wide. Nobody sits down, they know it's very fast. And they're all standing around and they ask, senior staff asks, how's your stress level? Is it red? Is it green? Or is it yellow light? And whoever says red or yellow gets some time with senior staff and deals with whatever project problems they're having. Imagine in an IT services business, you know what that's like, so demanding and things evolving and changing, customers very, very quick to change whatever they want. It would be terrific for the staff to know that they have that kind of backing. You get customer loyalty, you get improved performance, and you get staff loyalty. I mean, I've been in a bunch of very big companies. Every time I was feeling off the wall of stress, no guy manager said to me, wait a minute, what's your stress level? You know, what I got instead was it clearly seems like if you're feeling that much stress, it means you can't do the job, right? So that's, I think, a difference in the way women manage. To sum up, let's just take a look at the different characteristics of the sexes, how both men and women can learn from each other with what I call the gender toolbox. So strengths men have that women could learn from, strengths women have, men can learn from. First, I think we need to broaden the definition of entrepreneurship so it not only acknowledges what women are doing and have, but it also positively values their different characteristics and what they bring into a startup and a company. In addition, women can leverage those advantages, but they need to be mindful of the remedies and the challenges that they face. For instance, when it comes to leadership and team building, we've seen women tend to rely more on relationships than men do. And sometimes that makes them lower the benchmarks for performance. You get too close to someone, you don't really want to criticize their performance. So women need to make sure they don't fall prey to that. In addition, if men are in that command control kind of situation, they might learn from women to do more relationship building. Because if someone is scared to offer an idea because you get a lot of static if you make a mistake, it's not going to really grow the company. There has to be room for that kind of relationship and open-mindedness. In goals and risk-taking, because women value security and they're loath to take risks, they may actually forego the capital they need to grow. Not a good idea. And women could use some of men's risk-taking. Men just walk through the door, take the leap, there you go. Women kick the tires, have a lot of conversations, takes them a long time to pull the trigger. Not so good. And for sales and prospecting, the cliche, of course, is that women have all these soft skills. You know, they listen well and so on. And this is great for sales. And also, it's pull, not push, which is usually a great idea in sales. But sometimes they take too long to cut bait. So a lot of times as a male prospect or client or vendor who says maybe quite a lot, they don't want to say no to a woman, and she's not noticing that really he's not interested. That's one way. Also, women tend to push and sell the way men do sometimes because they're lacking confidence. And they have to be themselves. They have to be uniquely themselves. And after all, that's, I think, what being equal doesn't mean being the same is all about. So thanks a lot.